Welcome to Healthy Pro's webinar, Writing Recipes Right for Child Nutrition. Healthy Pro is an online menu planning software that helps child nutrition operators save money, save time, and create compliant menus easily. Today, we're going to share the importance of writing accurate recipes. My name is Lynn Shavinsky, and I've been in child nutrition for 21 years. Initially, I started as a food service director and worked in 4 different districts in 3 states, and now I'm with Healthy Pro. With me is Linsey LaPlant. Linsey's a dietitian and has also worked in a large school food service program. She was also a former child nutrition state reviewer before joining Healthy Pro. The learning objectives for this webinar are to understand the importance of a standardized recipe, identify the parts of a standardized recipe, list the benefits of using a standardized recipe, recognize the importance of scaling recipes accurately, differentiate between weight and volume measurements, show how to use the USDA Food Buying Guide to calculate meal contribution.
Thanks, Lynn. As a former reviewer, I would always ask for standardized recipes for meal service. Why do we need that? Besides being a USDA requirement, it makes your program more efficient. According to the book, School Food and Nutrition Service Management, a standardized recipe is like a blueprint for a builder, exact and tested. Or as we like to say, could a brand new employee make and present this food item just as you would like to have it be served? That is really the way you should think about creating a standardized recipe.
So what should be included in a standardized recipe? Well, a recipe name should be clear and descriptive and should help differentiate it from any other recipes that are similar. All individual ingredients should be included with the associated quantities. This includes items like spices and other ingredients that may not contribute to meal component. A serving size or portion must be included, and this is important because portion sizes vary based upon your age group. The total amount of the recipe that it will serve or the yield is also required so the meal component contribution can be calculated accurately. We'll demonstrate this later. Specific directions are important. If you prepare some things out of order, the end product may not be correct. Or you may want to display a salad in a particularly appealing manner, so you want to show the toppings clearly and not have them hiding under the lettuce. As important as directions are the inclusion of hazard analysis critical control points, or HACCP. This is often required not just from child nutrition, but also your health department to ensure food procedures are in effect. And of course, a crucial part of any child nutrition program is the meal contribution on the recipe. While it may seem obvious for things like fluid milk, there may be multiple ingredients that contribute to a component that must be combined in order to meet the minimum requirement. Ensuring the contribution is correct means reimbursement or no reimbursement. Here is a nicely detailed recipe with all the key areas completed.
All right, let's think about why these areas are important. Assume you are following a recipe for, say, homemade rolls. You need a recipe to tell you how many to make, how much of each ingredient, like flour, you would need to create that recipe. What if you did not have a list of the ingredients and missed a vital ingredient, like yeast? Your rolls would not be so light and fluffy. Or what if you missed the step to let the rolls rise before baking? Things might not turn out the way that you would have liked.
So you probably understand the importance of standardization for rolls, but why do you need recipes for everything? I once had someone tell me they were noted in a review for not having a toast recipe. It might seem silly to make a recipe for toast. I mean, don't we all know how to make that? But we're going to break down why you need a toast recipe and the overall benefits of standardization.
The first benefit of a recipe is that it identifies the ingredients to be used. This allows for the same yield, same taste, and same nutrient information and preparation. That ensures the same result each time. Knowing the item in use helps with ordering and forecasting. So let's try an example. What do you think of when I say peaches on the menu?
When I menu peaches without a recipe, what I have in mind might not be the same as what Lindsay's considering. A simple peach can be described in many different ways. Is it frozen, canned, or fresh? Packed in syrup, packed in juice? Drained or undrained cans will make a huge difference in the yield. When I order a case of number 10 cans, that is a different yield than one case of a 10-pound frozen case of peaches. So the product, not necessarily the number of cases, is what's important. Serving a quarter cup provides twice the yield from a case as would a half cup. And the cut of the peaches also can make a difference. What happens when you usually get commodity frozen sliced peaches, but now you've run out and are purchasing diced canned peaches? Those products are not the same. So everything about your recipe may be a little off.
Being in food service, you know the importance of how a food looks. It may take 20 presentations for a child to try a new item. You don't want a setback because your sweet and sour bowl looks different every time you serve it. The children could easily assume that if it looks different, it may taste different, or may in fact be different. Consistency is key, especially with children. I can think of my own children's reaction to pasta when we go out to eat someplace new. They have an idea of what pasta should look like for them, and any of these issues could have been enough for them to refuse the food, like spirals instead of spaghetti. The sauce could be mixed in, there is meat in the sauce versus a meatball, or there's green stuff sprinkled on top.
Another huge benefit from having a recipe is to calculate cost. Since food cost is a controllable cost within your operation, you want to monitor it closely. Having a fixed cost for a meal is really important. The only way to get that accurate cost is if you're serving the same thing each time. It shouldn't vary depending upon who cooks it and if they like peppers and include them or not, or just because there was a different chicken nugget on sale from the distributor and now you're serving a portion of 4 instead of 5. Not using an expected product can result in different cost every time and potentially more waste if the food product isn't accepted. That makes it hard to run a program effectively.
Consider a common practice in child nutrition that can really affect cost. Do you drain your canned fruit or not? Here is a comparison of undrained and drained portions. If you are not clear about which way you have calculated the recipe cost of that fruit, for example, you may be pouring money out as that liquid is drained. The cost of the can is the same, but the cost of the serving can add up, almost $1 a can. How many cans do you use over a year's time? If each can was drained, that is a lot of money lost if you were thinking that the yield included the liquid.
And of course, why are we all here? Child nutrition is a regulated program with very specific rules. Having a recipe makes it possible to confirm the crediting that is required to ensure that reimbursable meals are being served. The portion size must meet the minimum requirements for each age group daily and weekly, and the menu must provide a passing nutrient analysis in order for federal and state funds to be paid. A critical part of the recipe is the ability to scale it for different portions, since you may have different numbers of students that eat each day or over time. What if your lunch count grows and you're still using the same recipe? What if you have different portions that are needed because you've invited parents? Do you just cook the same amount every time and Stretch it a little so everyone gets some?
Typically, a baker is very precise, scientific, and uses a recipe regularly. You have to follow the directions so that the ingredients like sugar and yeast interact in a certain way. Cooks traditionally have more flexibility in deciding what ingredients go together. For example, you could add more cumin for more kick, but if you use too much, you might have to add sweetener or acid to the dish for balance. In child nutrition, compliance forces cooks and bakers to be specific and precise. A cook might not be able to make an adjustment to create the ideal food. For example, you need 4 tablespoons of peanut butter to count as a 2 meat alternate contribution. That is an exact portion, but it's not going to make the most acceptable or tasty sandwich. Compliance does not allow adjustments, and even options like rounding are limited by certain USDA rules.
In this example, a spaghetti recipe, we are rounding the meat up to 20 pounds to simplify the recipe for ourselves. That might actually make the portion non-compliant for the vegetable component. If your cook did not change the yield, then there is more volume of sauce, so the same scoop size contains more meat and less tomato sauce. Stretching the portion can also make the meal non-compliant. Cooks and bakers alike need exact recipes in child nutrition, not only for consistency, but also for meeting meal pattern compliance. Having a recipe is a step forward, but you must also correctly scale that recipe when you have to make different quantities. Here are some questions to consider when scaling recipes. Are you expecting your staff to do the math by hand? Correct scaling of recipes ensures compliance. It maintains costs, provides consistency, and gives an accurate analysis as well.
Using recipes creates repeat customers, and don't we all want that? How many people have a favorite dish at a certain restaurant? It becomes a favorite because it is the same every time, and if it isn't, you notice immediately. How disappointed are you if it's not the same way you remember it? Are you ever going to order it again? Doesn't it put a damper on your meal? Some students do like variety, but many of them want their favorites. Having a recipe ensures that your student's favorite item is the same every time they order it. Consider how your repeat customers might respond to these statements. Are these true for you? My kids get bored with the same foods. I change my menu every month to keep it interesting. I don't use a cycle because my menu changes too much. It takes 20 introductions before a child may try a new food. These statements can be both true and false, but think of how those options affect your repeat customers who are looking for their favorite items. It is a fine line to introduce new foods and retire others. Often, a change to an ingredient in a recipe may be what creates a change on your menu. It is also why it is important to design your new menu items after foods students are familiar with already. Then make it the same, time after time.
And finally, recipes make planning easier. If you know specifically the items you're using in the recipes, you can place an order that includes every ingredient needed, in the quantity needed, and at an expected cost and expected usage. This is what bids are all about. What items are 80% of what you purchase? If you use the same items, you can easily track them and share the quantities you will need. All of these recipe factors contribute to the key performance indicators for child nutrition. KPIs are the markers that you measure to determine the success of your program, income and expense. Recipes contribute to income. A consistent product and portion ensure students return and participate. Appealing food every time will ensure the students want your meals, and compliant meals ensure that you get reimbursement. Likewise, recipes help you to control your expenses. When every meal item uses the same ingredients and quantities, it should cost the same. This helps you determine what items to bid and how to recognize your menu costs. Food expenses, when products are the same, are based upon expected participation and actual costs and eliminate variable factors like having substitute employees prepare things or different people who might be ordering.
So now that we know why you need to have a recipe for toast and every item you serve, there are a few extra tips that we want to share. These are the kinds of issues we see when recipes are created. They are the difference between weight and volume, how to calculate meal components for compliance, HACCP guidelines, and special child nutrition recipes. Weight and volume errors are the #1 problem we see and become evident when scaling recipes. 8 ounces of weight is usually a different amount of food than 8 ounces of volume, or 1 cup. 1 cup, 8 ounces volume of water, in fact, weighs 8.321 ounces. One of the reasons this is so confusing is because the meal contribution uses a volume meal credit for the final item, like a 1/4 cup of fruit or vegetable and 1/2 cup of rice or grain. But when you measure out and cook rice, would you prepare 3 pounds of rice or gallons of rice? The prepared quantity of food is often measured in a different form than served. It becomes confusing.
I like to think about this lettuce and mashed potato example to keep volume and weight correct. Lettuce and mashed potatoes have very different weights, even though they may be scooped to the same 1/2 cup portion. The volume of a 1/2 cup is the same, but lettuce actually weighs half as much as the mashed potatoes. So here's a little quiz. Which measurement would be best in a recipe for each of these items? Here's a little hint. Volume is usually best for liquid. So in this case, the corn, the oranges, the rice, and the flour should all be used with weight measurements. The juice and the oil should be used with volume measurements.
Now that we have reviewed weight and volume, let's talk about the next hurdle, yields. Some foods have a different weight from when they are raw to when they are ready to eat. Can you think of a few? I can, like meats, rice, noodles, and even fruits, since you don't eat the peel. For example, we need a way to figure out how much product is needed so that we can get the correct contribution once it is cooked or prepared.
This is where the food buying guide is used. The food buying guide comes in a variety of different forms: paper, calculator, interactive online, and even in a mobile app. It's used to provide as-served yields from unprepared raw ingredients, like the ones we mentioned, ground beef, fruit. This is where the Child Nutrition Program calculates all crediting for meals.
So here's an example. To use the food buying guide, you must first get the facts provided. First, find the exact food. In this case, we'll use fresh ground beef with no more than 30% fat. It should be the specifics because beef with a lower fat content will have a different yield. Next, determine the purchase unit. This will be how the product should be measured within the recipe so that you can show the calculation. Here, it's in pounds. Then the serving size for meal contribution. This is the amount needed for the crediting of the final portion. This must be in a consumable form. And finally, servings per purchase unit, or the yield. This is how many final servings you will get, which is the yield, out of one purchase unit. In this case, for every pound or 16 ounces of raw ground beef, you will get 11.2 1-ounce portions of cooked ground beef, or 11.2 cooked ounces.
Let's walk through an actual calculation. We want to figure out the yield for this particular situation. Prepare ground beef for 20 students at 1.5 meat alternates. First, we get the yield by dividing the final amount by the initial amount. The final cooked amount is 11.2 ounces, and the initial amount was 16 ounces. That shows a 70% yield of the cooked meat from the raw. Then we need to translate the portion size if it's different from what the portion shows in the food buying guide. We are looking for 1.5 meat alternate portion versus a single meat alternate portion from the buying guide. So in this case, we divide the 11.2 ounces by 1.5 portions. That changes the yield to 7.48 1.5 ounce portions. And then finally, we need to figure out how many total portions we need and use the yield proportion to calculate what we're starting with. In this case, we want 20 portions at 7.46 portions per pound. That's the 1.5 meat alternate. So we will need 2.68 pounds of raw ground beef.
This process is what needs to be done for all crediting. For example, in this chili mac recipe, we need to calculate the contributions from beef, cheese, and maybe even the beans, then add it all together to see what the meat credit would be. Remember, beans may count towards the beans, peas, or legume vegetable contribution, but not in the same recipe in which they're counted for meat already. As you can see, it can be a complex equation to determine how to credit these items.
A third part of recipes that's often missed is HACCP information. HACCP information is used to ensure safe food handling for different preparation methods. Temperatures for reheating or cooking raw foods are different, and the HACCP steps build that information directly into the recipe. They point to the specific steps or corrective action that are necessary to ensure safety throughout the entire preparation process.
Specialized recipes may be necessary for menu items like food bars, where children will have multiple choices from a recipe, like a sub-sandwich bar, or for milk choices, where children can select either chocolate or flavored milk. USDA and many states allow and suggest you conduct a usage study over, say, a 2-week period or multiple service days to figure out what the typical usage of each choice is. Then those percentages may be applied to the numbers served for each item. For example, staff would count and record how many chocolate and how many plain milk cartons are served for a 2-week period. If you served, say, 1,000 meals over 2 weeks, and the total chocolate served is 900 and plain milk is 100, simple math here tells us that 90% of those kids take chocolate and 10% take plain milk. You then can write a recipe using the actual numbers with a yield of 1,000, or you can use those percentages in the recipe.
Weighted recipes may be used for items that are served with multiple choices as well. A baked potato bar, a pasta bar, breakfast omelet bar, condiments, finishing, and the most popular, salad bars. Weighted recipes must be based upon the total actual usage or a usage study. Recipes should not list each item and put the quantity in as one, as not every child is taking an individual portion of each item in the recipe. A weighted recipe, on the other hand, allows for a singular recipe, which simplifies the menu and meal pattern crediting, but it will identify each of the items, like the subgroups, that are included throughout the period of time. The buying guide should be used to confirm that the correct contributions are being offered. One caution about using a weighted recipe instead of having a recipe for each item separately is that when scaled, the recipe will always yield the same percentage of each product, not allowing varying amounts.
So let's do a little review. How could you improve this recipe here? Remember the components of a standardized recipe and the importance of consistency. So let's take a look at the name here, spaghetti and meat. Well, it's not very detailed and it doesn't really explain the full product. How about the ingredients? What types of ingredients, raw or cooked? The yield may not be considered from the food buying guide, combined to count the meal component. Does the unit quantity make sense here? How about looking at those ingredients like tomatoes and the veggies? Is the portion size clear? No, it just says 1. Are the meal components identified and correct? Are there clear directions that really anyone could follow? And do these directions include HACCP, those hazard analysis critical control points for food safety and those guidelines and corrective action? I think it's missing. I think we have some work to do here. That's much better. Here is the corrected recipe. This shows clear descriptions, ingredients like raw meat with the pasta, tomatoes and the vegetables. Portion size is specific. Looks like we've got some thorough directions here, and all the meal components are calculated and identified, and there is very clear HACCP information here.
We hope that we have helped you to see the importance of standardized recipes within the child nutrition program. While we understand that sometimes preparation may be obvious, it's best to use the blueprint to ensure that the correct item is ultimately produced. Thank you for your time and attention. We hope we've shared some information that will be useful to write recipes right and get exactly the product that you want.
Thanks again. Here is our contact information. We are happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.